transforming your dead dirt into living soil. And I'm so excited to have Noah Sanders here with me today. And we're going to meet him in just a little bit, but I want to give everybody a chance to join in. I see you guys are already coming into the chat and introducing yourself, so you know the drill. That is awesome. But if you're new here, say hello. Let us drop your name in the chat and where you're from and what you're excited about to learn about compost today, because that's what we're talking about is compost. It's going to, again, transform your dirt, your garden, wherever you're at in your journey with your soil into rich living soil. And Noah is going to give you some very great key tips that are going to help you, whether you're brand new or whether you've been composting for a while and you're looking to improve your system. I've been composting for 15 years. And when I was filming this class with Noah, I learned several things that just blew me away that solved many of the common problems. I'll get my tongue untied here soon. Many of the common problems that people have. So this is great. I'm seeing people come in, and there's almost 1,000 people in here already. It's going so fast, it's hard to track you guys, but I'm seeing Tennessee, Idaho, Nova Scotia. All right. Alabama. Very, very cool. A lot of people here from Canada. And it's an exciting feed. There's a lot going on as you guys are all jumping in. So we're going to give everybody a few minutes to do a little chit chat and introduction, so we give people time to get here for the training. But if you came to learn about compost and transforming your dead dirt into living soil, then you are in the right place. And I'm going to assume that many of you have tried composting before. If you haven't, if you're brand new, you're in the right place as well, because composting is very, very important to growing nutrient-dense, good-tasting vegetables consistently year over year. And composting seems like a mystery to a lot of people, but it doesn't have to be. It's actually very simple. And we're going to dig in today first of why, it's important. What's the difference between dead dirt and soil? And then Noah's going to show you how to make it very doable to create compost that changes your soil and improves it. And you're going to discover that not only can you make compost, you can make incredible living compost that's rich, and it will change the way your garden produces food for you. So hang in here for that. As I said, we're going to be meeting Noah Sanders here in just a few minutes. He is an expert at homestead scale composting. It's why we chose him for the School of Traditional Skills to come teach a class and to share this information with you guys, because he's just really nailed the composting method for the homestead scale, where you're not trying to do big commercial scale, but you also need to do more than this little batch in one of those little tumblers or one small little pile. You're wanting to grow some food, right? And so you've got to dependably and consistently produce a valuable product for yourself, that compost, year after year throughout the season. He's going to show you how to do that. We're also going to talk about Noah's class and his partnership with the School of Traditional Skills, where we've got 15 other instructors who are going to help you gain the skills you need. And we also have a fabulous community we want to tell you about that just launched. There's other like-minded homesteaders that you can catch up with, that you can learn with, you can even meet in your area. More on all that later, but those are all the things that we're going to be talking about today. And as I mentioned, the community. And with that community, we are launching a challenge on composting. And if you don't know what a challenge is, it's where we come together as a community and we go through a class like Noah's together, and you actually build your compost piles while everybody in the community is doing it. And you get to share your stories, your successes, your challenges, ask questions. And we're going to guide you through that process and through the class. And that's actually starting on Monday. So we're really, really excited about this. This is a powerful way to learn together from an expert that makes this very simple and doable, but with your peers. So again, we will tell you more about that in a little bit. Make sure you stay to the end. We've got our training today with Noah, and then he's going to stay after and he's going to answer your questions. And so try to make sure and hold on to your questions until after the main part of the presentation, which will last probably about an hour, maybe a little bit under. Hold on to those questions. He'll probably answer some of them in the presentation, and then we'll have time to dig into the details a little bit, and I will field questions for you guys and get them to him, and he'll answer them live right here. So stay here for that. And during that time, we're going to be giving away a few annual memberships, but you've got to be here for the Q&A, and you've got to be here when we announce it so you can submit your name and when we, announce you. So we'll be giving away a few of those while Noah is answering your questions. So this is going to be a great afternoon or evening, depending on where you're at. I'm so thankful you are here. I wanted to check the chat box a second before we move on. We've got over 1,200 people here. Kay, Amy, Wendy, Kate, a lot of people from Canada today. Very cool. Vermont, Florida, Utah, all over the country, and all over North America as well. So thanks you guys for coming. And before we get into the training though, I want to share a little bit of story with you about myself. I and my family, Carolyn and I, we moved on to our homestead in Idaho back in 2014. And it was a mess. The soil was a mess. We bought the property from folks that had been there for 40 years, but they were very industrial minded, and they sprayed everything. This property had been sprayed with herbicides, with pesticides, with fungicides, and it had a lot of challenges. As soon as we started pulling those away, we found, as we know they were a crutch holding some things up, and we started to see some of the challenges with the property. And the garden was dead. The soil was dirt. It was not soil. It was dead. There was no signs of any biological life. Not only had they sprayed it, they had gotten older and covered it with black plastic and left it under that. I don't know for how many years. And I think it just also cooked the soil besides being sprayed. And so, we were in a bit of a jam. And honestly, if we'd have known how bad it was, I don't know if I would have bought the place. But I had some tools, and I put them to work in building compost and building soil to start to overcome those problems. And compost really is the answer. And we're going to talk a little bit about inputs and different things that you can do. And people come to me all the time and ask about building soil and what to put on for this. Compost is the base of it. It's how we build soil. And in my main crop gardens and the kitchen terrace gardens, I use my own homemade compost to revitalize the dirt. It's alive. It's got microorganisms in it that actually break down organic and even inorganic materials, and they release the nutrients to the plants that are needed. And I love what you'll hear Noah talk about, because he talks about the fertilizer factory. You don't have to add fertilizer. You put in a fertilizer factory and it works for you. And all the basic pieces are there, the microbes are there, and it helps release the nutrition that you need. And I've done some teaching on this to try to help other people. I've written blog posts about it and shared this with folks. But I gotta tell you, what Noah has done and what I learned with Noah being there with him when we were creating the class and preparing all of this training, it blew me away. It opened my eyes. And I've studied several places around the world, learning compost for some great folks like Jeff Lawton. And Noah opened my eyes to some things, to some common problems I know are out there that I've had, that I know you guys have had, because I've taught it and I've heard from you. And he solved some things here. And you're going to see some of those things today. And it's also very cool because Noah's system can be done with materials you've probably already got on hand that are easy to get, or you already have them. And if you just follow the directions, it works every single time. So, and it's helped me. It's improved my process as well. And I'm really, really excited to pass that on and pass this on to you. So that's my story. I want to know a little bit about your story and about your journey. So before we jump in, I want to know where you're at in your composting journey. And let me know in the chat if any of these sounds like you. So you want to grow more food for your family, but with less weeds, pests, and changing water needs, you feel overwhelmed and frustrated when you try to scale up your gardening. And of course, we want our gardens to grow more food. That's why we're doing it, right? And a lot of times we're trying to do it in less space, which is doable. We want to minimize the weeding, and we'd love to require less watering. And of course, we want fewer pests and diseases, right? But what's the answer to that? The answer is soil. If you've heard me talk at all, you'll know that it's soil. And if you listen to Noah, you'll know that it's soil. Dirt is dead. You need rich living soil, which means you've got to use compost. So if that's the struggle you've had, let us know in the chat box there. Maybe you've purchased compost before, but it's expensive and it's often inconsistent, leaving you feeling like you've spent way too much money for something that's not worth it. And it can be a very big challenge to find good compost. And I've seen that in our area, even with so-called organic compost. And it's being made industrially. You can't depend on what's happening in the process, and you don't know what's gone into it, and if they're really giving you what they say, and maybe it's been in a plastic bag or in a warehouse somewhere. There's all kinds of issues. And man, it's hard to spend your hard-earned money. I mean, I'm happy to spend money if it gives me a good return on my vegetables, but this can be a real challenge. And let us know if that's a challenge that you've faced or dealt with. Maybe you've tried composting, but it's a lot of work and material for what feels like a small return. And so you're really not sure that compost is even the answer because of the frustrations and the failures that you've had. Small backyard composting systems that are used by a lot of gardeners often don't produce enough on a scale that's required for a serious homestead garden. And so it's hard to scale up. And so you find yourself kind of stuck, feeling like you need to buy it, but you want to make more, but your time's valuable. You want to see a return on your time. And all these things just make it challenging. So what do? We end up often defaulting to the easy button that really isn't so good. Well, I think we're going to show you today that there is not the easiest button, but there is an easier button in between that is much, much better. And maybe you're nervous that compost piles are going to stink. I get those questions all the time, and they're going to attract bugs and animals. And how do I keep the animals? And it's going to go bad and it's going to get nasty. And, absolutely. Nobody wants to deal with that. And if it does stink, it's not good. There's a problem, right? And you don't want to be bringing in scavengers and problems that add, problems to your property. And, some people are wondering if it's safe for their kids and pets. What do you compost? What don't you compost? How do you know when it's done? There's all these questions. And I know a lot of you have those concerns. Let us know if that's some of your concerns. I think we're going to deal with that today, and we're going to help you ease some of those concerns. But if you would just take this survey real quick and let me know which one of these is most like you. Are you the overwhelmed person trying to scale up your garden and just feel overwhelmed with the idea of composting? Or are you tired of spending money on low quality compost or inconsistent results? Or maybe you just feel like what is out there that's maybe pretty good is just way, way too expensive. Maybe you're discouraged by how much work composting is for a small garden. I sure can understand that. And again, maybe you're nervous about the stink or the animals getting into it. And if it's any good, how do you know if it's any good? Let us know in that poll there, which one is you. I know for me, what resonates the most is I've been overwhelmed at times trying to scale up because I'm trying to provide serious food for a large family. And I've often been discouraged by the amount of work. Those are things that definitely resonate with me. And I'd love to hear from you. I am actually trying to find the poll here right now so I can see your results. Give me a second. And okay, I see. All right. So most of you are overwhelmed trying to scale up. And I tell you, I can totally relate to that. I'm sure Noah can too. We're trying to seriously grow food for our families, and it's hard to scale up. I see a lot of frustration and discouragement as well, and how much work it is, along with a pretty good amount of not liking to spend the money you've got to get to buy what you feel is hopefully decent quality. And a lot of you don't seem so nervous about the stink and the animals, and that's good. You've overcome that hurdle. But these other ones, they're there, and I get it. I understand. I hear from people all the time and that are frustrated and struggling to get this right. And yet it's key to successfully gardening on the homestead level. And so when I knew I needed compost, I dove in and I built my piles, and I've had success. I've seen what it can do and seen how much it can improve the soil. But we need a system, and that's probably part of what you're missing is a reliable system. You've got a lot of complicated, conflicting information that doesn't really come together in a system that allows you to make good use of your time to successfully put together a program and a compost that builds soils and builds your soil and helps you grow the vegetables, maybe the fruit trees that you want, maybe even pasture. You can scale it up that far. But we're going to keep it simple today. I'm confident that this is going to work for you, what Noah's going to share, even if nothing else has worked, or if you've just got little tweaks you need to make. And Noah's going to give you some things that are going to be aha moments here today. And really, really excited about that. And, here's a quote from Noah. The simplicity of the system is the key to its effectiveness. People are often in composting is one of these things where people are often giving you too much information. They're making it too complicated. It's hard to get your head around, and it doesn't have to be that way. Instead of overcomplicating a traditional skill, Noah is going to show you how to keep it simple and make it as close to foolproof as possible. I believe if you just follow his directions, it's pretty much foolproof. It's going to work. I've been there, done it with him. I've been applying it myself. And this really is a back to basic system that anyone can implement. You can even get your kids implementing this and having fun with it, which Noah's going to talk about a little bit. So, as I've said, to teach you all about composting for your own homestead, I've brought Noah Sanders in. He's become a friend of mine. He's got a family farm in Alabama. And not only is he a homesteader, he sold his organic produce at many local markets. He's an author of the book, Born Again Dirt, Farming to the Glory of God. And he's also has his own academy called Redeeming the Dirt Academy, with both online and in-person classes on soil science, homesteading, gardening, and I think some other subjects as well. And one of the keys to what's helped Noah develop his composting method is that he went to Zimbabwe, Africa, to learn how to compost in a region where people had to grow a lot of food to survive. It was essential to do this. And they didn't have a lot of resources. They didn't have the money that you and I often throw at things. And so this had to work, and it had to work with minimal tools, and it had to work consistently. And so this back to basics approach, it works anywhere, again, because of its simplicity. And of course, now Noah teaches what he's learned about compost to help others grow more food with less outside inputs. And so with that, hey, Noah, how's it going today?
It's going great. Glad to be here and excited to see everybody's excitement about composting.
Oh, man, me too. There are a lot of excited people here today that are just really excited to hear what you have to say. I think we've got about 1,500 people, and people are still coming in. And before we get into it, though, just share a little bit about what's going on with you. I was just at your place, a month ago? It wasn't that long ago. Filming this class and getting ready for this training. How is that compost going, and how are your gardens going right now in May?
Yeah, well, we really had a great time, y'all coming out, and this is kind of our right in the middle of planting season, and our family's been going out in the evenings trying to get a good routine of, okay, let's go out after supper and get a little bit of work done in the garden. We've got one of our compost piles flipped this morning. My son and I were out before breakfast, and everything's just exploding. I have the crops that we planted in the video, actually, for the course when you were here. I need to take some pictures to send you, because they were these scrawny little lettuce plants that were a little bit of leftovers from our transplanting. And we set them out thinking, I don't even know if they'll, if it's the right time, but they are huge, beautiful lettuce heads. I'll have to share those photos. So we're just enjoying this beautiful spring time. Our gardens are starting to just explode with this early spring harvest. And we're getting out there to get the summer crops in, and working hard to get all of our compost piles flipped. And the one that we made with y'all heated up amazingly, and it's looking nice and starting to break down. And then we built another one with a class last week. So we're just it's just great to have an abundance of compost where you can be generous with it rather than, having to be stingy and have this little bit. It's just it brings a whole another level of joy to the process when you've got kind of like enough to put on there what we know we need. And so my wife we went out for a few minutes last night, and she just had her bucket of compost. She's going around planting stuff all over the yard, and that's just what we love doing as a family, because it's very simple to apply and family friendly. So it's just a blast.
Oh man, it's such a joy to have that abundance too, to be able to go out and just grab what you need. You made it yourself, you know what's in it, and just to go to apply that where you need it, and you can consistently make more. And it sounds like your season's getting off great. Ours is just kicking off here slow in Idaho, but finally starting to get going. So sometimes I'm envious of you down there in Alabama. Some people were asking where you're at, and Noah is in Alabama. So you get a little jump on some of us in the season.
Yeah, but come July, you might prefer to be back in Idaho. So it gets a little hot.
Yeah. I definitely am not accustomed to the humidity. Now, Noah, I want to get into your story a little bit, and your story is really interesting because you were already growing food very successfully before you developed this method. In fact, you had a market garden and you were selling your produce, so you were already working on a pretty substantial scale, much larger scale than most of us here are, before you discovered this system. And you weren't brand new to composting or growing a lot of food. And so I'd love to know and love to share with everybody what made you go looking for a new method, and tell us about where you found it.
Yeah, so to give people a little bit of a backstory, I was growing kind of a really small garden for our family in my teens while I was still at home, and really loved doing that. And then as I kind of finished school and was looking at what I wanted to do, God kind of led me to start a farm in partnership with my dad. We got some land and developed that. And we used some of Joel Salatin's model to create some pasture poultry production and eggs. And we were, had a plan to sell at local farmers markets and all that. So we had we were really blessed with the beginning, first season of that farm. But what I encountered scaling up what we had done kind of as a backyard garden was that the gardening methods that I had kind of done on a small scale, where I really actually didn't have a system. There wasn't a lot of the real good market gardening systems back then that you can learn nowadays. I realized that the big weak point in our production was I really didn't know how to grow vegetables well, and especially not on a scale that I could sell it. And fertility was one of those issues. Management was another thing. The weeds, the pests, all the stuff that on a small scale you can kind of get away with certain things. Mm-hmm. Once you multiply it up and you're like, I'm going to do an acre, and you're like, wow, all of a sudden you realize how much you don't know. So a couple years into the farming, I was looking at different methods, and as a Christian, I was interested in the way that people's perspectives and beliefs influence the way that they farm, because you obviously have very different opinions on how to grow things and how to deal with life, and a lot of that comes back to people's beliefs. And so I was interested in how does my belief in my role as a steward and the view of God's wisdom in creation, all that, how does that play into the way that I grow things? I grew up in Auburn, and it was very much an industrial kind of approach to agriculture. And then, saw some more alternative permaculture kind of approaches, but often it was very, how do I actually implement this in simplicity? So I came across these guys in Africa where they were teaching the poor really how to grow food and feed themselves in a way that kind of liberated them from the bondage of handouts, both, just food handouts, but also handouts of fertilizer and seed. And I saw that they had a really amazing system. They were kind of, it was based in a faith approach. For me, it's originally called Farming God's Way, and is still taught under that name many places. And the guys I went and learned from were part of Foundations for Farming, and really focusing on what are those foundational principles that we need to succeed, which we really believe is humility, faithfulness, and unselfishness, which is what Jesus modeled when he came. But these guys were just going, and people from Zimbabwe, from all different places, some guys from very poor backgrounds, some guys originally commercial farmers who lost their farms, all kind of people getting together to unite in helping the poor. And so when I saw their crops, which are absolutely amazing, and they have red clay over there like I do, I went there, learned from them. I loved the heart that they had in a lot of these farmers, turning around and helping in a country where they had had their farms taken from them and trying to serve back into that. So I love the heart of it. But then the crops were like absolutely beautiful in this red clay they were growing in. And their methods were so simple because their target audience were, people that may not have had a very good education. So they wanted to keep it as simple as possible. And while I was there, not only I learned some of the gardening techniques and stuff that we use now, but they had this amazing compost system that was developed by some of my trainers there and adapted from training that they took from Dr. Elaine Ingham, who is here in the U.S. and is one of the world's foremost soil microbiologists. And they had taken her system and maintained the levels of excellence, but simplified it where I saw, uneducated villagers making amazing compost piles. And the pictures here you see of these compost piles were made by a widow in a village there in Zimbabwe. And it was just to such an amazing high standard. And yet they kept it really simple. And so when I came home, I began doing that and seeing and actually being able to create enough compost to see results, to realize how every minute that I spent making compost was multiplied in the garden, So it's like I could either spend more time taking care of my plants, or I could take more time making compost so my plants don't take as much to take care of them. And so that's what we've been using. And then our heart is also to really be able to share simple systems that help people get started, to take forward that vision and heart of Foundations for Farming, to teach the poor and make it effective to anybody, no matter the resources they have. And so we basically just taken exactly how we learned it over there, and we've been teaching it here and seen people have incredible results with the simple method. And it helps people, even if they're going to mechanize, like you and I have probably both made it with a tractor as well. Mm-hmm. If you can do it in a simple format, it helps you to understand those basic principles of composting that then help you to succeed, even if you scale it up. So that was kind of our journey of where we're just really, again, passing on what we've received from these mentors of ours.
Yeah, I love that story, Noah. And I think it's interesting how, they say necessity is kind of the mother of invention, and necessity in this case has, taken a set of knowledge and created a system that just has to work, right? In an environment without a lot of the accoutrements that we have. It's easy for us to go buy this thing or try that or whatever. And there it's got to work. And how you've translated that and brought that back to us. So we really appreciate you sharing that. And I know people are dying to let's get to the methods. Let's hear, okay, what is this? What are you talking about? And so let's start moving toward that. But we have to start with understanding that dirt is dead. And Noah and I, both, just without even knowing it, both it's a statement that we use a lot because people talk about dirt. Dirt is dead. But help us out. What do you mean dirt is dead? And how does compost bring it back to life?
Yeah, so I think it's easy when we approach agriculture, depending on our background, to kind of view the dirt as a growing medium that we kind of grow in and we add, nutrients. And that can be the case a lot of times when we have soil that's been damaged and hasn't been cared for properly. And a lot of times when we think of dirt, it's just the minerals that are, in your local area. It's just clay, it's just sand, it's just silt, and there's not a whole lot of life in it. And so in order for us to grow things, we've got to kind of prop that up with a lot of chemical fertilizers or some other, even if it's an organic fertilizer, adding that because we're feeding the plant itself. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to contrast that with is what is naturally found in creation, or soil, which is this living, amazing system that is feeding our plants and is very different from kind of a fertilizer base approach to growing things, which I'm not opposed to, making some, organic fertilizers like some teas and stuff and adding that to help support our plants. But the base of what we see in creation, where everything's growing beautiful, big, lush, green every year without anybody bringing any fertilizer in there and applying anything. It's like, well, how do the plants that are taking over my farm, if I don't cut them back, all those weeds, how do they actually get fed? And it really is this amazing layer on the top of the soil where it's this interaction of the organic matter coming down on top. And then you have the base layer of the minerals. And then in between, there's this partially decomposed layer of organic matter that's blending with the minerals underneath and has all this amazing life in it that's teeming and ends up creating food in a slow release form from those minerals and from those organic matter and feeding those plants as they go. So what we say is it's compost is a fertilizer factory for our plants. It's different than a fertilizer. It's actually what's producing that for our plants. And so when we have that life there and that organic matter there, then it's actually alive. It's a system. It's a community. And that differs a lot from just a damaged, dead, inert, bunch of clay or sand or even organic matter that doesn't have any life in it. That also is not necessarily compost either. But that's what we talk about soil. It's something that's a living community that's producing food for the plants that are growing in it.
Right. Okay. Well, if it can transform a dry and infertile garden bed into a lush, productive one, and it's also going to make a good garden into a great garden. So this back to basics low tech system is accessible to everyone. It works. And I think understanding that our dirt is dead and then understanding about the living compost changes how we view compost, to know that it's alive, know that there's something going on there. And it's not just nice to have, it's necessary. It's absolutely essential to growing healthy, abundant living plants, because it's just not going to happen in dead dirt. So Noah, there's several composting options out there. Why do you use thermal composting, and why do you use it to teach this particular method?
Yeah, so the nice thing about compost is it is decomposed organic matter full of living organisms. So there's a lot of approaches you could take to make it. And, a lot of us, backyard scale will do what we call static composting. You just pile it up and you let it rot. And we'll do that with some of the material around our farm or out of our kitchen. And eventually it turns into something that we can put on our gardens. And you can also use vermicompost, where you're letting worms make it. And that's something that works well in an urban environment, especially, or when you don't have access to a lot of materials. But if we want not just to get rid of stuff in an organic way, but the goal of making compost is to make compost. We want the material itself. Then thermal composting, we found, is a method that really meets a lot of the goals that I have for my homestead, which is I need it to be fairly systematic. It needs to produce a consistent result that I can put on my garden and know that it's going to kind of do the same thing each time. I want to make sure that that heat in it is neutralizing any pathogens or weed seeds, which really expands the material that I can use when I'm building my compost pile. Because if you're just using static compost, meaning you just pile it and let it rot. It's a simple way to do it. But often the weed seeds, or if you're using diseased tomato vines or something like that, you may end up carrying things through when you put it back in the garden that thermal composting really takes care of. And it's very fast as well. So when you make thermal compost, you can have something ready to use in as little as 8 weeks. So whether I'm growing food for myself on a serious scale, or I'm growing food on a market scale for other people, that, quick, reliable, consistent, neutralize, no pathogens and weed seeds in the compost itself, makes the extra steps to manage a thermal compost pile worth it. And that's all a thermal compost pile is a pile where you're going the extra mile. You're taking a few extra steps to maintain conditions for the microbes that are in there to be really happy as long as possible, so that they can do their job as quickly as possible to produce, the compost that you need.
And this is really essential. No, I think our audience needs to know how essential this is to producing quality compost consistently, right? There's all these other systems. Somebody was just talking about a tumbler. There's all these different things. This thermal method that Noah's talking about is essential. And you need to know this before we get into the 1, 2, 3 steps, because it's key to making the system work.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I wanted you to understand, like, if you're going to go, go the extra mile to do thermal composting for a homestead scale, like, why is it worth it? And that's once for me, there's humility for myself when I went and learned in Africa of saying, you know what, rather than reinvent the wheel, if this works, I'm just going to bring it back and do it exactly like I learned it. And there's been a lot of blessing in that, and a lot of where I can focus my creative energies in other places and just tweak it for my area, but have that kind of on autopilot and on the to-do list, and know that it's accomplishing the goal that I have for my composting on my farm, where it frees up my brain, my bandwidth for other things on my homestead.
Right. And that's just great, because I know people, and I'm seeing the chat, and people are like, let's get to it. Let's get to the steps. Let's get to 1, 2, 3. And we're getting there, but you got to know that this is important. This is what makes the steps work, is understanding this, so that when you come out the other side, you can apply this knowledge and you're going to be able to do it consistently. So this is really, really key, understanding what thermal composting is. And so it's really simple. Noah, why don't you talk us about the materials and how we get there?
Okay, so if you want to build a thermal compost pile, this is where we're going to need more materials than, maybe we start with when we initially build like a static compost pile that we're just kind of adding to. And you may think, well, oh man, I got to gather all this material. But if you want a lot of compost, then we've got to be willing to go out of the way to like source material. And it's actually not near as hard as you think. It's very easy to find the materials that we use for our thermal compost piles. And we divide it into 3 major categories. The first is our brown material. And that brown material we have as a food source for the fungus that we want to basically culture and breed in this compost pile. Because what we want to end up with is partially decomposed organic matter with fungus and bacteria in it that we can put in our garden, that are then going to be breaking down all the organic matter and stuff in our garden, kind of like a probiotic. That's what we're going for, is a probiotic. So this pile we're making, we want to give food for each of those things. We're going to give food for the fungus, food for the bacteria, and the energy that they need to be able to do that. So the brown material is a food source primarily for the fungus, which, if you go in the woods and you look at a rotten log, you look at any brown woody thing, that's what the fungus likes to grow on. And they're going to be the ones releasing nutrients from that. Mm-hmm. Brown material is is anything really that's cut brown, is the way we describe it. It's mostly carbon. So that would be what we tend to use is brown leaves, that fall in the at the end of the year, or anything that was brown that we collect from our garden, like corn stalks. If they've already dried out, they've already lost the sugars. The sugars are out of that plant material, and it's mostly just carbon. It can be weeds, dead stalks. It can be anything from a grain that was harvested when it was already dry, rather than when it was green. So straw, leaves, brown material, stalks and stems from your garden, those all qualify as brown material. And we like to have a bit of that material chunky, like pine cones or sticks, so that those won't decompose through the whole pile. But we are going to, in order for our pile to decompose and be the kind of material like you see in the forest between the leaves and the dirt, it's got to be aerobic microorganisms that are breaking it down. They're the ones that produce the healthy stuff. So we want air in the pile, and that's where that structure of a few sticks or a few pine cones or other things that you might have or is really helpful, where you don't need to blend it up. So that's our brown material. That's going to be about 40% of our pile. And then our green material are going to be things that were cut green. You can see on this slide, it looks kind of brown, but it was cut when it was green. So we actually collected this from a field on our farm. And what it does is kind of like when you feed hay to animals, the reason they can get energy from it is because it has the sugars. And so this green material still has the sugars, and that is what the bacteria really thrive on in our pile. So this is a bacteria food, this green material. So this can be green leaves, this can be grass clippings that you collect, it can be hay, it can be green material from your garden that you're pulling out. And what you're gonna do is, you can see in here, we're stockpiling enough of this material because we want to build a certain size pile, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The third ingredient is nitrogen material, and that basically supplies the energy for the bacteria to break down that green material. They need that to be able to do that. That's why if you ever plow in a cover crop like a green material, you plow in some kind of organic matter in the ground and the bacteria begin to decompose that, farmers know they'll have a bit of a hit on their nitrogen in the soil because those bacteria will use it up to decompose it. So this is this material that's most important for our pile to get hot. And so you have 40% brown, 40% green, and then your nitrogen can be either, it can be multiple things. One is, animal manure. And on our homesteads, a lot of times we have that available. So it's a bit more potent, manure is pretty potent in terms of nitrogen, but it's not the only thing we can use. We can also use any leguminous plant material. So a legume would be like a bean or pea or anything that has that relationship with nitrogen fixing bacteria on the roots. It can even be things like honey locust branches or any kind of wild plant that you have that's a nitrogen fixer in your area. The guys I learned composting from, they actually never used manure. They just used naturally occurring nitrogen fixing plants that grew on their farm. And if you're using the plant material, you want it to be about 20% of your pile. So you'd have 40% brown, 40% green, and 20% nitrogen. If you're going to be using manure, then you're going to generally use about half that amount, so about 10%. So you'd end up having 45% brown and green of your total pile. And those are going to be what we use and assemble to actually make the compost pile. And we stockpile them until we have enough to make a pile that's a minimum of 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot. And then we don't add any more material until after the, and except anything other than water through the end of the process. So these materials can be collected year round. And that's what we do on our farm. If I'm raking leaves, we put it in the green pot of the green, what we call, these are like our stockpile bins. If we're pulling out sweet potato vines from the garden, we'll put that in the green material pile. So you kind of are stockpiling. Obviously in the fall is when you're going to get a lot of your brown material, and the green in the spring, in the summers when you're going to collect a lot of your green material. So you don't want to wait till like the end to get it. You want to be, cleaning out your barn or collecting it from somewhere else. And if you don't even have a homestead yet, leaves are fairly easy to find even in communities. Green material, if you have to be careful about collecting green material from places where they may have had herbicide sprayed on it, because those can stay in the material. And you want to make sure that's from a safe source. That's why we like to harvest it on our farm. But I also know local farmers in my area that I have a relationship with, and I get hay from them because I know what they spray and that they don't spray anything that's going to actually harm my plants. And the same thing with the nitrogen material. If you're getting manure, you want to make sure that it doesn't come from animals that are fed something that has been sprayed. Especially what we're talking about here is a broadleaf herbicide, something that kills anything other than a grass. And those can stay in manure, in grass cuttings or hay for a long time and actually harm your garden. So you got to make sure that your sources are good when you're collecting them.
Okay.
All right. And then let's see. So the final product, let's go back to that one. Yeah, is it's amazing because you start off with this manure from the barn, you start off with leaves, you start off with all this hay, and when you get to the end, it smells amazing. It's safe to let your kids play in. It's probably good for them. And it's bringing just this amazing abundance of not only nutrients to your garden, but all the microbes needed to unlock those nutrients in your garden. And you're going to ask about what are all these other products that you could add to your compost pile, like kitchen scraps and those kind of things. You can add those as a percentage when you build a pile, but your primary ingredients are going to be these three things that we've actually talked about. And as far as this particular, method, the beauty is it doesn't require any fancy tools. So, we can always complicate things with fancier equipment and all that. But if you've got, some basic things like a rake and a shovel and a fork, and, you can cut some stakes or get some metal poles, that's all you're going to need to do this system. And that kind of makes it accessible for anyone. I used to use, wire fencing around them, but even that, it's like, well, what if somebody can't get that? I love teaching methods that are simple enough that, require non-specialized equipment to do it. And I think most of you are not going to have to buy anything that you don't already have in order to do this. And, we're monitoring the temperature. I mean, we're elevating this. We're trying to do like the highest standards possible. We're trying to go according to Dr. Elaine Ingham's, standards that have been kind of adopted for quality compost around the country, where it's like we want to get to a certain temperature 3 times for at least 3 days in order to make sure that all material is safe. And so we adhere to those standards and teach them and try to shoot for those. But we can do it as simply as, for instance, monitoring the temperature. What I learned in Africa was just take a piece of wire or a metal rod and we put it in the pile. We pull it out. If it's too hot to hold for more than 5 seconds, it's to the correct temperature, and we can start counting off those 3 days that we really want it to be hot. I can use a thermometer, but it's simple enough that as long as you have a piece of wire, you can do that. And when we're teaching, it kind of opens that up to anybody, whether or not they can get the compost thermometer or not.
Yeah. I'm just going to intersect for just a second.
And
let folks know, people have a lot of questions about between the lines. Save those. We'll get to them in the Q&A. There's a lot of details. We want to just get through the basic method, and then we'll talk about what different materials, what category they fit into. He's going to address kind of weight and volume here in just a minute. So just know that it's coming, and what we don't cover here, we'll get to in the Q&A. So go ahead, Noah. Thank you.
Yeah, a few other examples of just simple ways to monitor is when we're monitoring the moisture content. We want to shoot for about 70% moisture. And it's neat because if you take a handful of the material from the center of your pile and you squeeze it and water comes out, it's probably too wet, and you need to turn it to kind of let it dry out. And maybe you want to, suspend something over it to keep too much rain from being from penetrating that if you're in a really wet climate. If you squeeze the material, you open your hand up and it stays together pretty well. But when you squeezed it, no water came out, then that means it's probably at about the ideal the ideal moisture level. And then if you squeeze it and you open your hand up and it just all falls apart, then it's probably too dry and you need to add water. And then keeping it simple, like for water here, the way that we get the pile wet initially was we use drums. We use trash cans or 55-gallon drums or whatever, barrels that we fill with water that we dunk the material in, and then we put it right on the compost pile and that we're building. And that gets it wet, but it also, for instance, Africa, where it's really dry, it may take a while for somebody to haul and collect water, or, it allows us to be very frugal with our water, but also make sure that we're really getting that pile nice and moist, which is activating and waking up all the microbes. And there are times, when we make our piles, sometimes they're up to temperature within about 24 hours, which shows how quickly those microbes wake up and start doing their thing.
Okay, well, let's get to building our compost pile. It's simple. You've given us a good foundation here for some things we need to know. There's going to be some things to fill in, but it really is super simple. You just need a little background. So you guys that are hanging in there, you're getting it. You need to understand the why to make the steps 1, 2, 3 really work and really doable. And so let's get to that now that we've got a little basic understanding and learn about building our first pile.
Okay, so let's just pretend you're at my farm and I'm going to have you help me build a compost pile. So the way we would do it, we'd come up here to our composting area and I would show you just a very simple, our bins and how we lay them off. We have 6 stakes in the ground. In this case, they're just metal pipes, but they can be T-posts. They can be just wooden, tree sections or branch sections that you cut out of the woods. And we make 2 rows of 3 stakes, and they're all spaced 4 feet apart from each other. And that allows us to build a 4-foot pile between 4 of the stakes, and then have another area next to it that we can flip that pile into in order to turn the pile back and forth. And we're using these stakes to support the corners so that our pile is as spherical as possible, meaning we want to have the maximum amount of volume for the minimum amount of surface area, because the outside of the pile will dry out and the shell, in the sense of it, will not be active, only the center part of the pile. And that's why we don't recommend anything smaller than a 4-foot by 4-foot by 4-foot. 5 foot by 5 foot by 5 foot is even better, because more of the material is in the center of the pile and more of it's cooking at one time, but it is more material. And sometimes it's hard on a homestead level to accumulate enough material for that large of a pile. But you go down to like 3 foot, and all of a sudden, because about 8 inches on either side of the pile all the way around is too dry to cook, less than 50% of your pile would actually be cooking at one time. So that's why we stockpile material and build at least a 4 foot pile. So we lay out our bins like this, really simply, with 6 stakes. If we're building more than one compost pile, which we do on our farm, you can do big rows of stakes and just kind of have lots of bays that you kind of flip your piles around depending on how you're managing them and where you want them. You can start at one end, buy your materials, and flip them down the row until you get to your garden. But we'll be building our pile in these in between 4 of these stakes to start with. So then if you were here with me on my farm, what I would do is I divide everybody up into different teams. And one thing I recommend is you can do this by yourself, but you would need to pace yourself over, you'd need to think about your time and your energy levels. And it might be, a pretty good long afternoon for you to build one of these piles by yourself. This is where community is amazing. We get out there with our kids and do this. We do this with other people where it's so much fun to do together. And then you can share the compost. You can, have the joy of the community. So yes, you can make one by yourself and you can definitely do that. I've done that before as well, but it's really, really great if you can get, some people together to be able to make this where you can share it later. Hopefully you're not, hopefully you're trying to, if you're homesteading, either you have family or you're trying to build community. So we divide up into teams. We have a brown team and a green team and a manure team or a nitrogen team. And so everybody kind of goes to their stockpile, and we start with the brown material, and people start bringing brown material and dunking it in the barrel that we have allocated for that. And then we're going to take it and we apply a layer about 2 to 3 inches on between those 4 stakes. And we get that first brown layer down, and it's all just the brown material. Once we get that layer of brown material down, then I would say, all right, green team, I need you to bring some material. And so we would have the green team come, they would dunk material in their barrel, which a lot of times they'll go ahead and dunk the material in their barrel, and then they'll be ready to bring it when I ask. And then we'll do a layer of green on top of that layer of brown, and we're trying to keep them about even. So as you can see in this picture, I'm throwing that initial layer of brown in between those stakes. So we do a brown layer, a green layer, and we're trying to get about equal parts of both of them. And we're keeping it nice and level and flat. And we're making sure that the center of the pile doesn't get too tall. And then we focus on the corners. And it's amazing. You can build a really nice, sharp cube, which is going to be the best bang for your buck in terms of how much material is cooking, if you just focus a little bit on making sure that the edges are what you're building and you're not letting the center get too tall. So we do a layer of brown, layer of green, those equal parts, right? Because we're doing equal parts of both. This is the green material here. As you can see that we're dunking, bringing that. And then after we do that brown and green, then we do another layer of brown and another layer of green. So you can see this is when we kind of got those first layers down. And after we do 2 sets of each alternating, then we bring the manure. And I would say, all right, manure team, I want you to bring yours. Now, the manure team is not dunking their material in the barrel unless they've got a legume. If you have a manure, you're just going to mix it and try to make sure that it's nice and wet in a wheelbarrow, or you can just do it in the pile, kind of like you mix cement on the ground. And then you're going to bring that and you're going to apply a layer. If it's manure, because we're wanting about 10% of our pile to be that. If you think about it, we've done equal parts brown and green, 2 layers each. So if each of those layers represents 20%, we've got 20% of each. So we have 40% of each, and then we add another layer. That's how we're going to maintain our ratios. As we do brown, green, then nitrogen. We're going to do half as much if it's manure, and we're going to do an equal layer if it's a nitrogen fixing plant material that we put on there. And then all of a sudden we have a set of layers in the ratio that helps us to achieve those ratios that we're looking for, equal parts brown and green, and approximately 10 to 20% of the pile nitrogen, depending on what source that we're using. Then we just keep doing that same pattern over and over again. having all the teams bring their different amounts. You kind of have, this is the nitrogen material, the manure that we put on. And once we get the manure, it's like, okay, great. We're going to start with brown again. Bring the brown, then bring the green, then bring the brown, then bring the green. Okay, bring the manure again. And normally everybody kind of gets into a rhythm and everybody gets messy and has a lot of fun. And then before long, you've started building it up enough that your pile is as tall as it is wide and long. So we're looking for a 4 foot tall pile by 4 foot by 4 foot that we're going to end up with. Now you can make it maybe a little bit taller because it can sink down, but this is kind of what you end up with. As you can see, it's nice and cube shaped. And the beauty is, what's amazing is in this little pile, sometimes when you're dunking the material, the dunking is such an effective way of wetting this material where it's not too wet, not too dry, because you dunk it, you submerge it, it kind of drips and you put it on there, that you really end up with a pile with just the right amount of moisture. But as it squeezes down, you'll see all this water squishing out of the pile. And sometimes you can use, between 50 and 100 gallons of water in one pile. You need to have your hose there continually adding to your barrels, because as people use it to dunk the material, they'll run out of water in their barrels. But once you do that, it's a simple way to, with a team of people or even yourself, to just keep in mind those ratios as you build it in these layers. And it goes a lot faster. It goes pretty quick and is pretty simple.
Hey, Noah, I want to accentuate for a minute for people about the way you're adding the water, because these are one of these things that was an aha moment for me, and people, have struggles getting the compost pile working, and water is a tricky one. And a lot of people could be saying, well, I've got the hose. Why don't I just take the hose and add it to the pile as I go, instead of going through the trouble of putting it in the barrel and dunking it? But you guys, it is the dunking of the material that ensures you get the right amount of moisture. You don't have to guess. And this is a big, big issue for all of us that Noah's the first person I've seen do this, that takes that guesswork out of it. You have built your pile with the right moisture in it. Now, Noah can talk about going through the pile later, but you have got it started. You can be confident that you have the right moisture in it. And I love that.
Yeah. And it's a wet, everything's pretty wet when you're done. And that's the fun, is come ready to get messy. Some of my friends in Zimbabwe are like, if you're not dirty by the time you finish this, you weren't having fun. And we've done classes where we have people that are a little more academic coming in. They're like, oh, I want to learn this and stuff. And they're, kind of reserved. And sometimes we get out there and we love to have fun. And next thing you know, like the reserved academic kind of person is spraying everybody with water and having a blast, doing this. So you got to have fun. You got to maintain the joy in all of this. And when making compost is like one of those super fun kids that one of the super fun things that your kids look forward to, then all of a sudden it can become an actual sustainable part of your homestead than just like a chore that nobody wants to do.
Oh yeah. And people ask us all the time, like, how do you get your kids involved? How do you get them want to do things? This is a great way to get them to want to do some good work and connect them to the garden and your food and everything else. Go ahead, Noah. Sorry, there's a little bit more here. I know you have to.
Oh, no, that's fine. Yeah, please interject anytime and ask questions or anything like that, because that helps me to cover it better. So once we build the pile and we've got this amazing pile, then that's when, with our family, we want to celebrate and just like, we love always taking pictures with our piles when we're done. But once we're finished, we're going to take that rod that we have. Sometimes, I've used, irrigation stakes that I have laying around, or, use a thick piece of wire or a piece of rebar, and we then insert it where the end is ideally in the middle of the pile. And it's actually fun, because then you have this way to track what's going on with your pile. Because once we build an initial pile, I'm always like, next morning I'm going out like, is it getting hot yet? Is it getting hot? Come out the afternoon, like, woo, it's getting hot. Like, come feel this, baby, and feel it. And everybody, it's exciting to kind of see that progress of it getting hot. But just do that with your rod. And what we kind of teach is this a simple way of turning the first couple times with based on temperature, because we want to make sure, in order to neutralize all of our pathogens, that we reach a temperature. I'm not going to talk about like what temperature it is, but it's basically just once that rod is too hot for you to hold it comfortably, you're at the right temperature to neutralize those pathogens and those weed seeds and really help your pile to break down. And once it gets to that point and you monitor it, you want to leave it for at least 3 days. That way it has a chance to neutralize those things before you turn it. Then after 3 days, you want to turn it as soon as you can so that it doesn't go too long, because you can start having a die off of your microbial population. Now, sometimes things come up and I don't turn it exactly when I want to, but those are that's what I'm shooting for the highest quality stuff. Then once it reaches that temperature again, I count 3 days at least and try to turn it after the third day. And I want to do that 3 times. After that, the pile should start to cool down for the rest of the 8 weeks. And we can turn it maybe once a week until the end, just to kind of help everything have a chance and take a turn on the inside. But towards the end, after it gets a bit cooler, that's when the fungus comes in and really starts to multiply. And they don't like disturbance quite as much. They kind of grow like fingers in like cobwebs. So the more you disturb them, you kind of disrupt their cycle a bit. But then once it kind of goes through to the end and we've turned it, and after 8 weeks, we've got a beautiful, product that we can put onto our gardens.
Really, really simple, you guys. And it really is that simple. And we're going to talk about using your compost here. But I want you guys to know, you got a lot of questions. You got questions about what kind of, materials. People are asking questions about pine needles. That's a big one. We'll answer those in the Q&A. We got to just move through and get through the basic training, and then we can dive into some of those details during the Q&A and talk about them for sure. Okay, so just hang in there. It's important to get through this stuff, and we can ask. You can ask those questions, and I'll get them to Noah for you. So, really simple method here. I'll recap it in a little bit, but let's talk about how to use your compost for a moment. And Noah, I saw you do this. I got to help you build your piles. I saw how well it heated up. It was 95 degrees in less than 24 hours. I mean, it really got going. And it's low tech. It's easy. As you guys are seeing, your kids can do it. You can do it with your kids and have a lot of fun. But so say you get your compost done, 8 weeks later, it's ready to go. It is that dependable, you guys, if you just follow the steps. Noah, give us some little thoughts on different ways to use what you've created now.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize how valuable compost you make yourself is, because there are very, very few places that you can buy compost that's as quality as you can make it, because of the life that's in it, because of the diversity that you can often put of materials in there, and the way you can monitor it. And when you have it, every handful of that stuff has so much potential to bring life back to your soil. And there's a lot of different, ways we can use it. We can apply it really thick or stretch it. But one way that we utilize it as kind of one of the steps in the resiliency of our homestead is to use it for potting mix in order to start seedlings on our farm. This spring, we just took some of our compost from last fall. We sifted it so that we could kind of get the finer compost for seed starting. We could take the chunkier stuff we sifted out and put it around bigger plants. But then we just use that to start our seeds in. No added, fertilizer to the seed mix. There's no soil in it because it heated up. There's no weed seeds in it. And we had the healthiest plants that I've seen. And I've grown a lot of seedlings over the years. This is actually the first year I said, I'm just going to go all compost with my seed starting. Because when I was a market gardener, using ProMix with vermiculite and, powdered chicken manure in it and all this stuff to get this secret blend. But I saw better results from using just sifted compost this spring than I've had with any of our fancy mixes in the past. And that excites me because it frees me up to say, I don't have to buy any of that stuff anymore, and I don't have to buy plants either. I can start them all myself. So that's one thing you can use it for.
Love it.
Then you can also just broadcast it on your bed if you have enough. And so that's obviously the more the merrier a bit in compost. To a certain level, what we're always trying to do is look at nature and say, how did God create the soil to work? Is there like a foot of compost on the ground, or is there how much is there? And you normally see a couple inches of kind of composting material between the fresh leaves on top of the forest floor and the more just straight minerals down below. And so we normally, if we have enough to use, we will try to apply about 1 wheelbarrow load for every kind of 6 foot by 3 foot of bed. And that's kind of what you see here that we applied. And then we use a no-till system on our farm. So then we'll apply mulch back on top of it. And then we'll plant through the mulch and through the compost into the soil underneath. And all of a sudden, when those seedlings come up, they'll have a really, really amazing fertilizer factory to begin growing on. And just for the people that are out there with red clay, This is what we have that I'm standing on right here. I mean, we had this bulldoze cleared, and it is just red Alabama clay without anything except just removing the weeds and applying compost and applying mulch on top of the compost. You would not believe the health of the crops. Like the picture earlier on in the presentation of all the vegetables and stuff, it's just Alabama red clay with compost. But the secret is we're mimicking that profile in nature, where it's just the clay underneath, then the organic matter, then the mulch on top. And I think that's one reason, that's one way we found it really, really effective to use it. However, sometimes we don't have that much compost to use, right? It's like, I would love to put it 2 inches thick over my whole garden, but I got way more garden than I've got compost. And a lot of times that's the case, on my homestead. So what we do is we save it back. And when we plant, we will apply compost either in the hole or in the row when we plant our plants. That way it's the most effective because it's right there next to the plants and does the most good. And it goes, a lot farther. Often when we're first initially getting a crop put in, sometimes like this garden plot right here has some pretty nice spinach, but you can see a little bit of yellowing around the leaves. This has only had compost applied to it. We turned it right from grass and red clay and just use the no-till method just to remove that, put weeds, to put the mulch on last fall. So this is the first crop that's ever grown in this red clay. And so these plants have gotten a good start, but you can tell they're starting to need a little bit of extra top of nutrients. So another thing we use our compost for is what we call top dressing, which is where we'll apply it around plants that are growing in order to give them kind of another boost of that fertilizer factory to get them through the rest of their growing cycle.
Wow, Noah, thanks. I'm excited for you guys. If you guys see how simple this is put together, and we'll go through the details in the Q&A a little bit, maybe fill in a little gaps for you, but this is really a super simple system. It's very, very dependable. And let's do a recap, okay? So we learned why your dirt is dead and what it needs to become living soil that will grow beautiful, healthy plants. It needs this quality compost that Noah is making. You've learned how thermal composting works and why it simplifies the process, saving you so much time. And so that's why it's so important to have that foundation before you get to the steps and understanding how these things work and why they're important. You've learned how to build your pile. Really, really easy, right? You've got browns, you've got greens, you've got nitrogen. There's a ratio there. And kind of by volume, in this case by layers, 2 inches about of browns, 2 inches of greens. I think that was 1 of nitrogen. Noah, did I get that right? Or
yep.
No? Yeah, 2, and 1. So anyways, very simple method, and it works every time. That the way he applies the water, I can just tell you from so many years of composting, just following the layering, doing the water the way he does it. If you'll just do that in the volume, it works. It's a method that's going to work every time. It just takes the guesswork out of composting, whether it's your first one or your 51st one. And, you can see how your finished compost is going to build your soil, equipping it to grow produce. You can also use this for your trees, pasture, for flowers, wherever you want on your property. And this is seriously going to take you from buying low quality or expensive high quality compost or fertilizers to having a ton of organic rich compost ready for your garden, because this system is also replicable. Like you heard Noah talking about the stakes in there, right? You can replicate this as much as you want. So you can start a pile, you turn it, you start your next pile if you need that much compost, and you can move right down the line, and it makes it extremely simple. And so what's next, though? Where do you go from here? This is a lot of information. Noah and I could sit here and talk compost all day, and we're going to have fun talking some details with you guys here in a few moments in the Q&A. But the time we have here can't cover every detail and every nuance. And Noah and I both love learning and teaching these strategies that make homesteading more efficient and less stressful. That's part of the goal, is to help you guys, learn some tools, some systems that help you do this in this modern world that we live in, because you still have a life to live even while you're doing that. And you want proven results, something that works every time. And what happens when we have the right system is more than compost. The right system, whether it's composting or anything else, lets you build this life that helps you meet your goals. It helps you grow more food, helps you spend more time with your family if you want to, but without being a slave to it, without it running you over. And again, that's what Noah's system does. It lets you build your compost pile, monitor it in just a few minutes a day so that you can go on doing the other things that you need to do and that you want to do. And by paying attention to how nature works and learning from people who needed to grow abundant crops for survival, Noah's cracked the code on this one. And we're happy to teach it to others. He's happy to teach it to others. But what's next? Where do you go from here? And, when it comes to learning homesteading skills, you've got options. You can certainly bootstrap it. You can just take these free trainings. You can go to Google, YouTube. We've all done that. And we try and we learn and we fail and we try again and we fail. But there's a lot of conflicting information out there. I've done all of that. Got started when there was no Google and no YouTube. And they've helped a lot, but they've also complicated it. And a lot of us start there, but we want to accelerate this journey, right? You want to be able to apply these things to your life and get the strategies down. And that's where we're here to help, to make this more simple and more strategic so that you can learn from somebody like Noah and master it, get proficient at it, and keep building skills that help you put all of this together. And so you can learn from an expert who's ahead of you in their journey, someone who can help you cut through all the noise. We've done some of that today. We're going to do a little more in the Q&A, but there's a lot more there that can help improve the process even more. And it's also great to be able to learn from a community of people who are in this together. And, if you've been homesteading much, there's often moments, sometimes a lot of moments where you really feel alone. You don't have anybody to talk to. You don't have anybody to share your experiences with. So it's great to learn from a teacher, but it's also great to have people that are going through it with you. That's going to give you fewer headaches. It's going to cost less in the end. And, that's why I want to introduce you to Noah's full class, Homestead Scale Composting. He's got a full class at the School of Traditional Skills, and it walks you through all the details. Noah is there with you. It's like he's with you in your yard, taking you through every step of the way, answering all the nuances. You get to watch it. It's one thing to see it here in a short presentation, and certainly a lot of you will take this and you'll go with it, and you'll do great. You have all the tools right now to do great, but we understand that sometimes it's nice to have all the details. That takes more time. That takes more production to do that. And so Noah has joined up with us at the school to do that and created a professionally designed and filmed class in a format that's going to make this even easier than what you're taking away from today. And with the full class, you've got the shortcut to learning, and you don't have to do the traveling that Noah has done to Zimbabwe, that I've done to Jordan and to Australia to learn some of these things. He's distilling this information down for you. And this class is a class that will elevate your gardening. It'll save you from harsh, toxic chemicals, that tendency to take the easy button. He's just going to make the easy button here with the composting and help you get there faster, doing it the right way. And it can take you from a small backyard compost container to a homestead scale compost that really works, that will help you reliably produce the compost that you need for your garden at whatever scale you are at. And you'll learn his entire system from start to finish, how he gets living compost teeming with microbes that are ready to revive your dead dirt. You will come out of that class confident about the science of compost. You'll know why it's the most important addition to your garden, your trees, your lawn, your pasture, and you'll have options for how to find the materials you need for very low cost. You're going to feel more comfortable that thermal composting is not scary and does not require any fancy tools. And you'll be able to get your compost pile up and cooking, up and heating, and keeping it going without a bunch of expensive inputs. And the rod was the other one. One of the things I love that Noah does. A good thermal compost thermometer that's long is expensive. You don't even have to do that. And that's why Noah didn't give you a temperature today. There are temperatures. We can talk about them in the Q&A if you want. But it's that simple that you can just have a rod and use feel, and you've saved yourself some money and have got a simple system that works. I think that's just really, really cool. And so in Noah's class, he's going to walk you step by step, like he's there with you through all the materials you need, how to get them, how to store them, even if you don't have access to manures. A lot of you were asking about that. Again, we can talk a little bit about in Q&A, but he's going to take you through that even deeper in the class. You're going to feel confident that you and your family are ready to build your compost pile in the right way that makes it work every time. And that's something that all of us have struggled with at some point in time. And you're going to be excited that you can monitor your compost with just a few seconds a day. And then every few days you turn it. You'll be clear about the timing of turning it and how to. And this is actually one of the most exciting parts. Noah takes something that's obvious, that's often frustrating and discouraging and overwhelming, like we said earlier, and you're going to find joy in turning your compost pile and building it, because he's going to show you how to make it fun for the whole family instead of just this stressful, overwhelming job. And I know for me, when we can find joy in the work that we're doing, and the end result, what we're really after, right, is sitting down at the table together, enjoying the fruits of our labor. This is a part of that process, and this enriches that process, and it gives you confidence, not just in growing your vegetables, but in, you know, the building of family and the nutrition that you're providing for yourself and others. And it really is a joyful experience. And when you need to make tractor loads or somewhere in between one pile and tractor loads, Noah's going to show you how to do that in the class and how to scale this so that it's right for your system and your needs, because that's another huge issue, is making compost at the scale that you need it. And so you need the tools to know how to adjust and do that. Then you'll be ready to use your finished compost, and you'll know what to do when you want to make your compost go further. Few things that people have taken Noah's class. Jordan says, I was up early this morning with my son and saw it was posted, had to resist the urge to binge watch it. We just released it 5 days ago, so this class is brand new, and these are folks already in there. My son and I started watching it tonight, and Noah already cleared up so many errors and conflicting information. And that's really the truth, and that's why I'm so excited about this class and Noah's method, because there is a lot of stuff out there. I've had confusion I didn't even know I was confused about. And I see a lot of you guys, and Noah clears so much of it up as you go through and get into the details of this class. It really is just amazing. And of course, this is not a 30-minute, not a 1 hour. This is a comprehensive class with 21 lessons that are, you're going to be able to come back to look at those little moments in time where you just missed that detail or you need a refresher. It's right there for you to come back to. We've designed all of our classes so it's really easy to go back and find that information. You don't have to sift through an hour lecture to go, oh, I just wanted to know this point or that point, or I wanted to visually watch and see what he did in detail without watching even 15 minutes. The classes are structured that way to make that really, really easy. And of course, we have what we call our skill sheets, and they're a synopsis of the class or something you can print up, you can take with you. You can see in this one back in there in a couple of the pages, it's got charts for you to keep notes and records in. So we give you a whole lot of support in these skill sheets to take these things out with you and help the overall process. And so besides Noah's class, I'm really excited. This is the first time publicly that I'm getting to announce this, and that is our community, that we've launched a community for the School of Traditional Skills for all of our members. And there are thousands of people in there, and it is very exciting. It's very energetic, and a place for you guys to come together and not just learn from, you know, our instructors, our expert instructors at the School of Traditional Skills, but to share with each other, to have the dialogue with people that are learning the same things in the same ways, and sharing your successes and sharing your failures. And, you know, this is a common thread that I've heard from so many people and that I've experienced myself for so many years, and the struggle to connect with people who understand and who are doing the same things and walking the same road. And to me, it's exciting that we've been able to combine expert instruction with a community. So you guys are walking down that road together, and the community is even going to help you find people near you if you want to. And the community is live, and it's already going. You can see here some of the comments that we've had and the successes that people are having and what's going on inside there. And occasionally even our instructors come and jump in. And Noah was just in there recently answering a question. And so sometimes they're going to show up and help out. We also bring them back for a Q&A in 2 weeks. If you're a member, Noah's going to come back. You will have had time to take this class, and you're going to be able to ask even more, specific questions that help you out. And he's gracefully doing that. And that's another benefit of being a member. And it goes on. And this is something we've also been waiting to start for a long time, but we had to get the community up, and that are challenges. We are going to do our first community challenge around compost. And our community manager, Bo Davison, is going to lead in that. He's going to take you through Noah's class, and all of you that are members are going to build compost together. You're going to follow Noah's method. You're going to do it together. You're going to share your stories. You're going to ask questions. You're going to walk right through it. Bo is going to lead you in it and do it himself while you guys are taking Noah's class. This is powerful, and it's exciting. It's exciting to be able to offer. It's really, really powerful for you guys to be able to learn this way. It's absolutely amazing. You're going to do it together. You're going to learn together, and you're going to celebrate together. And you're going to jump right in with thousands of members who are doing the same thing, sharing your thoughts, sharing your tips. We'll bring Noah back. And this just goes on. I'm so excited because Noah's class is just the beginning. And with Noah's class, there's a whole bunch of gardening classes. You can take Noah's compost building and apply it to the raised bed gardening class by Brian Lowell. You can take Noah's class and material and compost and do the same thing that Paul Gauchi's doing from Back to Garden Eden. He uses a little bit different material, but you can do the exact same thing. And so these classes are designed to build on each other. Melissa K. Norris is going to help you then take all of this and extend your garden season so that you can grow earlier and later in the season and use the same ground to produce even more. One of the things you need to do that is good compost to enrich your soil with. And, from there, we keep building. And there are classes that are going to help you preserve the harvest from the garden, whether that is pressure canning with my wife, Carolyn, or fermenting with Lisa Bass. There's cooking classes from world-renowned Sally Fallon of Nourishing Traditions. And there's so much more in here. Classes, herb classes on first aid. We've got a class coming on colds and flus. It really just keeps going. A couple words from some of our members. Desi, I've always wanted a can, but never had, or she says, honestly, made the time to try it. Watching Carolyn's pressure canning class gave me the motivation I needed to confidently try my water bath canner for the first time. Pickles turned out fabulous. Lisa's fermentation class inspired me to try lacto fermentation for the first time. You can see the successes that people are having, even as first timers. Now, I'd love for you to join me. I'd love for you to join us, to join all of us, to join this community, to join our instructors on this journey and become a part of the school. And yes, one of you guys is reminding me there, we have our homestead design class by Nicholas Bertner, who takes you through laying out and designing your homestead, which again, one of the things these classes all have in common is obviously there's linked skills in here, but we're putting systems together for you guys to make this doable. We know you're busy. We know you're trying to lead a full modern life and apply these traditional skills. Not everybody can just move to the country and homestead and make a living, but you value this so much, you're willing to put the work in. We value it so much, we want to get you the knowledge you need to do it as quickly as possible and integrate it with the life that you have. And that's one of the differences with the School of Traditional Skills, that we're doing this in a way that's going to allow you to integrate this and integrate it to your life where you're at, or integrate it in a way where you can transition into a predictable way. And so I really want to invite you to come and join along. And here's what Jamie B has to say. I just wanted to reach out and say thank you for creating such a wonderful library of information. As someone with limited time and resources who is reaching for an end goal that sometimes feels unattainable, the wealth of reliable and trusted information you have provided is invaluable. That really just sums up what we're doing here at the school and what the school offers you. And of course, you've been asking, I know you want to know, okay, how much is it? How much does this cost? And, part of my response is, how much does it cost you not to take this, to learn the hard way, to spend the hours of time sifting through all of the information? And, I could go on and tell you about, well, there's 16 classes in here and a new one almost every month. How much is that worth? Thousands of dollars. How much is a community worth that's on the same track as you are? It's really it's really invaluable. And it's really, as Shauna's saying here in the chat, it's an investment. It's not a cost. And in the end, it's going to save you a lot of money, a lot of time, and bring you a lot of joy in this journey. As you learn, you accelerate your journey, you join up with other members. So how much is it? Today, I can offer you, an annual membership that costs $17 a month. That is not very much. That's nearly 50% off of our regular price. And at $17 a month, right, with Noah's class, you're going to save that in compost. I can say that hands down. You just build a couple of his compost piles and you've earned that back. And that's not even beginning to touch the other classes or the community. And so I want to invite you to check that out. You should have a link up right now to go check that out. It'll take you to another page so you can still hear us talking. Come join us and check out the school. Join the thousands of members that are already there at the School of Traditional Skills. Take your homesteading to the next level. Well, we're going to help you experience less frustration, help lessen the overwhelm. And look, we can't get rid of it. We're not making you a promise we can just make it all easy peasy. It's not. It's work. And you guys have committed to living a life that is sometimes challenging, but we're going to walk alongside you. We're going to make that journey easier by giving you the skills that you can just put to work, by giving you a community where you can ask questions and engage with each other and learn together. And we can bring our instructors back to answer questions for you. And the value is incalculable. So go check it out, click the link, or go to the website at schooloftraditionalskills.com and, sign up now. But click this link here because this is going to get you the nearly 15% off if you go there. And let me tell you what's going to happen if you click on over. You're going to find a page here where you check your plan. The best deal is definitely the annual plan. It equals $17 a month, but it's billed on an annual basis. That's where we can give you the best value. But you can also pick monthly if you need to go at it that route. That's just fine. It's still a very, very good price. If you're a lifer, that link should be up. Hopefully we've got our link up for our moderators. You might tell them in the chat where it's at. I got a few people asking where it is, so help them find that. And so you're going to pick your plan, and then after you pick your plan, you're gonna start signing up. You'll get to a page. Just ask for your email. Make sure you put the email in that you want us to communicate with you at. You'll create a password, and you'll add your payment method, and you're getting all set up there. And then there's a few other details where we make sure we get the information we need. We invite you to share your number, your address with us. You don't have to at all. Eventually, we're going to be able to text you if you would like us to so you can stay up to date on events that are happening or what's going on in the community, things like that. That's your choice. So we ask for that. If you don't want to fill that in, you just move on past it, and boom, you're in the community. And it looks like this, and you'll see your classes. You'll be able to see your progress and your library and get access to the community right away. So hop on over there, check that out. And if you're still wondering if it's worth it, I got to tell you, you have nothing to risk, because for 30 days, you can get in there, you can enjoy the community, you can enjoy the value. And if you decide it's not for you for some reason, within 30 days, we'll give you your money back. And no questions asked. We're not going to pressure you. You just come check it out. So you've really got nothing to lose to see if this is for you and if this can help you, and what you think about it. So join us, come hang out with us. We're here to walk along your side. We're going to continue to grow in instructors. We're releasing a new class almost every month. We're actually going to be releasing an app sooner to make the whole community and classes easy to use, easier to take with you, easier to view. That's coming. And we're just going to continue to build skills and grow together. So come on over, join us. While you're doing that, go ahead. Now is the time to start putting in your questions. Please drop those into the Q&A, and you're going to see in a minute why your questions need to go in the Q&A, because they will get lost in the chat. So please put them there, and the moderators will get those to me so I can start getting them to Noah. And we're also going to give away a few annual memberships during this class, or during this session. If you've happened to buy the class, go ahead and jump in, get it. If you do happen to win, we'll refund you. You'll still get your membership, so don't worry about that. But to win a class, I want you have to follow the instructions. We're going to test you here, okay? You got to follow the instructions just right. I want you to enter your full name, first and last, and say, I love composting. First, last name, I love composting in the chat box. That will get you in the drawing for the free annual membership. Put your questions in the Q&A. And with that, I'm going to look at my form here and start sharing some of your questions with Noah. And you know what? I can get rid of the slideshow. There we go. Okay. Hey, Noah, I can see you now. Right. Okay. This one's from a lot of people, and I knew this was coming. Lots of questions about food scraps in compost. This is just one of them that's representative. Is there a type of composting where you put all your leftover cooked food to decompose? Do you recommend this? Can we do this? Just talk to us about that, and what's your perspective on maybe why you don't teach it in this method, but can you, and how would you?
Right. So that is one of the questions we get a lot too, because when we think of making compost, a lot of us, it's kind of starts with what do we do with all our kitchen scraps and where do we put them and what can we do with them? And so that tends to be a primary, source of material that we're looking to get rid of through composting and that we have on hand and we want to know how to use. Because thermal composting requires two things. One is, a larger amount of material, and two, that you stockpile it ahead of time. Vegetable scraps are something that can fit in there, but they're not something that can really, they're something that you would add as if you have them when you build a pile. But to take, food scraps and stockpile them in a pile for, 2 or 3 months before you build it, they're not really going to keep that long in just like a pile by themselves. So if I was, one way you can do is you can create a static compost pile of some kind of brown material or like some wood chips or something that you can put those food scraps in to kind of keep them, to bind that up until you want, and then you could add them to your pile later. But a lot of people have asked about animals, and that's the challenge, is you start dealing with food scraps or those kind of things, and then you're going to have animals want to come and dig through it that you don't have when you're just using your, materials that we talk about for thermal composting. So for food scraps on our homestead, we tend to feed them to chickens. We tend to feed them to worms in a vermicompost system, or we tend to throw them or to pigs, depending on, what kind of animals you have that'll eat scraps, or we throw them in a static compost pile separate where they can stay and let until we want to run them through a thermal compost pile. And there's a lot of creative ways that you can use food scraps, including just burying them under plants, those kind of things. So the reason we're not including that in this system is because normally food scraps, unless you're collecting it from a bunch of restaurants or something like that, is not normally any large percentage of the pile that we're building. It's normally pretty minuscule and insignificant, and we can add it to it, but it's not going to be one of our primary ingredients.
Right. Cool. Before I get to the next one for you, Noah, I know I see a couple questions about coupon code. You guys, if you click the link here, you don't need a coupon code. It's already built in. You just pick the plan you want and you'll get the pricing. Now, I know some of you are going to go to the website and look around, which is great. You want to see a little bit more about the other classes or whatever, and encourage you to do that. Just know that if you click over there to buy, you won't have that pricing in. So come back, get this link, and then you'll get in for that pricing. And don't worry about it. If you make a mistake and you end up purchasing the wrong way during this time, just reach out to customer support. We'll get it straightened out and we'll get you the pricing. So you really don't have to worry. Question from Erica, and this represents a whole bunch of questions I saw in the chat while we were talking. And it's about chicken poop with pine shavings in it. And does that can I use it, and does it go into the nitrogen pile?
Yes. So that's a good question. And one thing that I explain in the class is how different manures from different animals kind of have different potencies. And I think we're all kind of understand that intuitively if we've dealt with multiple animals. Generally, the bigger the animal, the less potent or concentrated the nitrogen in the manure. And the smaller the animal, the more concentrated it is. So that's why chicken manure is just really hot. And I've used on my farm, because we rotate a lot of our chickens around, I don't collect a lot of chicken manure except in like our chicken brooder, where like, you know, if you're raising them in a healthy way, you want to have that deep bedding. But as long as you're not, you know, in my case, the hotness of the chicken manure means that I can kind of treat the bedding that I take out of my coop as manure without factoring a whole lot in of the bedding itself, unless I've just added tons and it's mostly bedding with a little bit of manure. In general, I can just treat it in the same quantities as I do like cow manure, and the bedding kind of cuts it to a level that it kind of equals, you know, similar ways. So if as long as it's not like mostly bedding with a little bit of manure, then I would just treat it as as a nitrogen source.
Awesome. And a great way to go, because that's a lot of people. That's going to be their source of nitrogen is the chickens, right?
Right.
On a small holding.
And that carbon that you put in there as a bedding is like a sponge that's kind of soaked up and is holding that nitrogen, you know, and then when you put it in there, it kind of can release that. So it's good to have that bedding because it actually keeps it to be, you know, held in there, and then it can kind of be that carrier once you add it to the pile.
Right. Giveaway, our first recipient here. I love getting to give these away. Nellie Wilson. Nellie Wilson, you have won an annual membership to the School of Traditional Skills. Please email us at hello@schooloftraditionalskills.com. That email should be up in the sticky message at the top of the chat for you. Copy and paste it. And make sure you do that while we're here, okay? And we want to give those away while we're here. So congratulations and welcome. Let's see here. We're going to move through these questions, get as many of them as we can, Noah. So Tess Price is asking about tarping the pile. Her question is, will it cause it to go anaerobic? But maybe just talk about tarping the pile in general. Is it a good idea, and when or when not to?
Yeah, so we don't cover the pile with anything unless there's you're in some area where there's monsoon season or there's tons of rain. And we really discourage you from, you know, putting plastic over your pile because of that idea that it can go anaerobic. And just to explain, anaerobic means it's being decomposed by bacteria that don't breathe oxygen. So you're creating conditions basically where oxygen using bacteria won't work. And then all of a sudden you have this anaerobic microorganisms move in. And the challenge with them is when they decompose stuff, they're the ones that create the stinky, smelly kind of byproduct that often will cause your compost to have negative things to it. So if you are going to put a tarp over the top of your pile, then make sure that there's a little bit of gap and there's air between that and the pile itself so that your pile can still breathe. That's why some people, you know, will have compost blankets or wool. You can use a wool blanket over it where it's not going to rot. And that allows, you know, the moisture to kind of be moderated, and you can maintain ideal conditions closer to the surface. But again, you can always get fancier. We're just trying to keep it as simple as possible, you know, in this basic lesson that we're teaching.
Yeah, easy and doable. Do you ever, this is from Kimberly, do you ever, to extend your compost, make a compost tea or a foliant spray, anything like that? What do you think about that?
Yes. So compost tea is a great way what you're doing is you're taking like a small amount of compost where you know, the medium is the organic matter that's kind of like a probiotic you're going to bring to your garden. And let's say you don't have a whole lot of it, but it's really good living compost. You can gain a lot of benefit by making a tea where you brew that compost material and, you know, culture the microbes even further, where you have then a liquid solution that you can then spread onto your garden. So you're getting the benefit of the microbes. You're not adding the organic matter, but they'll be taking advantage of whatever organic matter is there. So yeah, we recommend that when we typically teach composting as a way to multiply the effect of it. Yeah,
cool. This is a question I've seen quite a few people ask, so it's on behalf of a lot of people, and that is, when turning, do you need to, and when do you add water? So we've got our water. We know with your system, you're getting the right moisture, and that's super easy, and you've just hacked that. That's great. But when you go to turn it, are you going to have to add water sometimes?
Yeah, so that is the one thing you're going to add after you initially build your pile. We don't want to add anything else otherwise we kind of start our clock back over, from day one, because we want all that material to be 8 weeks old when we're finished. But when that pile gets really hot, I wish, I could show you this, how much steam, probably on the course when we turn the compost pile, you can see from those videos, there's a lot of steam that comes off these piles, and that's all evaporation. So if your pile's getting hot like it's supposed to, you're going to lose a lot of moisture in those first couple of weeks from just the heat in the pile, let alone just ambient drying out from, the sun and stuff. So when you turn it, there will probably be at least one time that you need to add water, because it will have dried itself out too much. And that's where that squeeze test I talked about, if you're grabbing that material from the middle of the pile and you squeeze it and you open your hands up and it just kind of falls apart where it's so dry that it's not sticking together anymore, then when you turn your pile, you're going to add water as you turn it. You can't just hold a hose on the top of an existing compost pile, because the water doesn't actually get down in it. It tends to run off. But if you turn it and you don't have to add near as much. You don't have to dunk it again, because it has a lot of water already. You're just topping up. And in this case, I'll use a 5-gallon bucket or a watering can or a hose on hand. It's not that complicated. You normally don't have to add a whole lot, but that's what you'll do. You'll monitor that and do the squeeze test. Again, if you squeeze it, water drips out, it's probably too wet. If you squeeze it, open your hand up and it stays in a nice little clump, but no water squeezed out, that's what you're looking for. And once it gets to the point that it falls apart when you open your hand up, that's when you want to turn it and add water while you turn the pile.
So let's expound that a little bit. This isn't a specific question, but I think it builds on that as people are moving through. There's a point where that compost is moving towards finishing, and I think it's not as wet, right? It's not as wet. Can you kind of tell us where that is in the process, where like it's starting to get done and maybe you don't need it as wet?
Well, I'll just share an experience of mine, Josh, that was kind of amazing to me, because microbes in this compost really help hold on to moisture in an amazing way. So we had a really long drought on our farm, like long time without rain. Everything was so bone dry. And I had an aged finished compost pile that was several feet tall still, because it shrinks down to about half to third, sometimes even a quarter of what it is initially. So it was probably around 2 feet tall, 2 to 3 feet. And when I went to get some material from that pile, it was still moist all the way up to within a few inches at the top of that pile, even after not having been rained on for a long time, because those microbes and the moisture holding capacity of them and them wicking it up from the ground below. If you've ever had raised beds, if they're 6 inches raised, you got to keep watering because they just drain like crazy. Mm-hmm. Well, imagine being able to have a 2 foot tall raised bed that hasn't, been watered for like a month, and it's still moist all the way up to the surface. I was just blown away. So it's not going to dry out completely. We're still wanting that life in there where it's kind of like idling at this, that same kind of moisture level, even in the aging process. But you'll find it's easier and easier to maintain that. It'll kind of self-regulate that moisture level the more that it ages.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. I'm going to go to one before we're going to get into some types of materials here, questions like that, because there's a lot of those. But just a clarification on the 40%, 40%, 20% ratios. Is that by weight or volume?
Yes. So that's a good question. And we found that if you are, applying it in layers where the materials that you're applying are generally the same density, so you kind of can evaluate, am I using fluffy hay and like really finely decomposed and dense leaves, or what, are they somewhat equivalent? We've never differentiated between that. It's always been by volume in our layers, never by weight. And we've, never seen the need to really go to that level. Just generally, you take the material, as long as it's not super different from each other, then as long as you put it in 2 to 3 inch layers and you go for that, we're shooting for kind of that ratio or shooting for excellence. But when reality hits, it's a bit more of an art as you build your pile than it is, an exact science. And if you get off by 2 degrees, oh my goodness, 2% of your pile is going to fail. No, it's not. It's not, it's helpful to have something to shoot for that helps us to achieve those ratios within the window that's going to work every time.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I love about the way you teach this, because so many people are getting into the chemistry, and I've even done that when I've taught it, and all these numbers that are really hard to get a grasp on. And you make it so simple to just follow that through. And we're not striving for perfection. You're going to create something really, really good without having to get stressed out about all the ratios and the percentages and different things that some people teach. And that's extremely helpful. So the 40-40-20 is a guide to get close by measuring and by volume, and it's going to work. Let's talk about a few different things that should or should not be composted when it comes to materials. And a lot of people are asking about pine needles because a lot of people live in a evergreen coniferous, I think I said that right, coniferous forest, and similar to my area, and they have a lot of that kind of material. Is that okay to use for your browns?
Yeah, well, or if it's green and it's cut green, right? So we have, it's, a type of leaf, but it's a special type of leaf for a tree. And pine needles are great because they don't break down as quickly as some other things. They have more of that woody lignin in them that kind of resists decomposition, which is why it makes a great landscaping mulch. It has a lot of really beneficial things because it doesn't decompose as quickly as grass does. But that means that we probably want, and what we recommend is, because I live in Alabama, we have a lot of pine trees too. When we add that, we want it to be a smaller percentage of our pile, because when we get to the end of the 8 weeks, it'll be somewhat decomposed, but not to the level that everything else is. And if you have it as that percentage of the material, it will continue to decompose once you apply it to the garden or as you're letting the pile age. But if you go with just pine needles as your brown, you're probably going to have problems achieving that 8-week decomposition process, just because it's more probably closer to the woody material layer, less the brown, and is going to provide great structure and all that, but it's going to take a little bit longer to decompose. So minimize, keep it as a smaller percentage of the pile and let the heat of the other materials kind of help cook that as it goes through the process.
Great. Hey, I want to congratulate Nellie again. She claimed her annual membership. So congratulations, Nellie. And I want to give another one away to Andrew Ebby. Andrew Ebby, you've won an annual membership to the School of Traditional Skills. Please email us at hello@schooltraditionalskills.com. Make sure you claim that. Hopefully you're here. Claim it while you're here before we leave today. And somebody will get you all set up there. And hey, you guys, if you've got any questions about the school, now's a great time. I know it's a big decision, a lot of things to think about. We want to help make sure you're getting the knowledge you need to make a good decision there. So drop those in and I'll tackle a couple of them while we're talking compost. Noah, coming back to just putting things in the compost, are there types of leaves? This person, Pat, is asking specifically, are the leaves that should not be composted?
Yeah, well, the biggest problem that we're going to face in our compost pile is not necessarily like poisonous plant material. It's going to be chemicals that were added to plants unnaturally that persist a lot longer. Poison ivy eventually composts into dirt again. Most any quote toxic plant will compost back into something that will feed other plants. But when we have something like Grazon or another persistent herbicide, and we have leaves from that, one of the things I guess caution you about adding the most is plant material that you don't know for sure the source of, and you're not sure whether or not it was sprayed. Brown leaves that are collected, for the most part, normally come from trees in urban areas or other areas. Nobody's spraying trees for the most part. That's not as common as if you're getting grass, and that's, sprayed a lot of times, whether it's lawns or it's pastures. But if you're talking specifically about poisonous plants or plants that could be potentially toxic, which a lot of things, there's a lot of plants you don't want to eat that you might want to compost. I wouldn't make a straight poison ivy compost pile. I'm not sure if I would make a poison ivy compost pile at all, but there's other things, like we have people in Africa. What about neem plants? They have the neem old trees and other plants that, might have some properties. It's like, well, don't just build a neem compost pile. Use the rest of the material that's not that plant to kind of be the generator of the heat that's going to help process a percentage of that material that's going through the pile.
Awesome. Great. I got a question here about the classes I want to answer from Charlotte. Are all the classes available at any time or are they offered as they come up? No, they are all offered. If we've produced them, they are all offered. They're all there 24/7, 365 for you at any time. They all have downloadable skill sheets that you can download, print, and they belong to you and they're yours. And of course, the community is always there. So it's always accessible to you at any time of the day. Something's bothering you 2 o'clock in the morning, you need to get up and find an answer. It's there for you. Now, Noah's not going to be there, but his class will be there. So absolutely. And of course, as we produce classes, it's just going to grow and grow. You know, we launched in September. We've already got 16 classes there, and I think we'll have 20 by the end of year one. So you can see what we're doing and what we're producing there to really help you guys build skills. Let's see here. A question on use from Gianna. Does sifting compost before applying to crops matter? So do you need to sift it? And I think this is a good question, Noah, and you might talk a little bit about what finished compost looks like, because your finished compost and the way you handle it is a little bit different than what a lot of people talk about and the expectation that's been created. And I think that's really good to unpack because it'll give some people a little bit of confidence.
Yes. So we tend to think of finished compost as like looking like coffee grounds, right? It's that completely disintegrated material. And that's great. But that is more of like a, it's completely finished where you could really grow in that. That's kind of like, it's great. But finished compost that we're talking about with thermal is more appreciating the role that microbes and partially decomposed organic matter play in that top layer of the soil, which means I'm kind of like, if you go into the woods, I mean, you think, okay, well, trying to be all natural here, where do we see where do we see a compost pile in nature? Well, you don't, right? There's no big compost piles in nature in general. It's always like sheet composting a little bit at a time. And that happens between the fresh material applied on the top of the ground and then the dirt under, the dirt or the minerals underneath. And what we're doing with the compost pile is we're creating ideal conditions to accelerate the production of that sweet spot of nice, partially decomposed material that is kind of like the action zone between the fresh organic matter or mulch on top and the minerals underneath. That's where you'll find most of the feeder roots. That's where you'll find most of the feeding going on. And that's where the fertilizer factory really takes place. So we're not looking for like completely decomposed. We're not looking for just fresh material, which again, you can apply fresh material, but it's more mulch and it'll start composting. But to jumpstart and really have a reliable system where we can give back generously to the land when we're taking from it, the compost we're looking to end up with is going to look, you can probably tell what the materials were once they're finished decomposing. They'll be like, oh, this is a partially decomposed leaf. And at the end of 8 weeks, you'll be able to say, this is a little bit of the grass and all that. But if you dig down in the forest, you can kind of see on the top, there'll be obviously like this year's leaves. And then down below, you'll see probably last year's leaves, which are, pretty broken up. Then below that is like 2 years ago's leaves, which are almost completely decomposed. And all that activity is going on there at the same time. So what we look for when we have the finished compost is something between, in that kind of zone that can look like chunkier material. It can look a bit, rougher. It can get more fine as it ages, but it's perfectly fine and does great added to that layer between the mulch on top of the ground and the dirt or minerals underneath. And obviously, if you want to sift it, that's more a structure kind of challenge, because when you're planting in, like seedling things, you need a finer material. But when you're putting compost around a tomato plant, it can be chunkier. So that's where if we sift it, we get different, sizes of materials that all are going to provide good benefit, but we can use them in different spots around the homestead depending on where they work better.
Yeah, cool. Let's see here. Let's talk a little bit about browns and greens. I still see a bit of chatter and questions, and I think sometimes that's an area to clear up. So browns are organic material that is dead when it was cut, right? Like straw, the plant was dead when it was cut, or the leaves died on the trees and fell. And so there's materials like that we call browns. are there other browns that can be used, and specifically things like cardboard, newspaper, maybe there's some others we're not thinking about that we can use as brown material that still kind of meets that, carbon rich definition of a brown?
Right. Yeah. And that's, if what you just said there about the carbon is a good way to think about the difference between brown and greens, is your brown is more of a carbon source, which is kind of what's left over in plant material after the sugars are kind of removed. And then the green materials are those that have the sugars still in there, or more of a fresh kind of ingredient. And those sugars stay, whether it's got primarily carbon or primarily sugar, it has to do with, when you're collecting plant material, when it was cut. But we can also apply the same thing to, like, okay, well, newspaper, is it sugar content, or is it mostly going to be just the carbon material left over after the processing? It's going to be more just the carbon material. Therefore, that's going to go in our brown material pile. If we have food scraps that are high in sugar content, or fresh content where it's not woody, it's like most food scraps kind of go in that green category, or even sometimes close to the nitrogen, but a lot of times in the green, because we're thinking, does it have sugars or not? And so you can ask that question: does it have mostly carbon, or does it have mostly sugars? And a lot of your paper products are all going to fall in that carbon kind of category, or the brown category.
Cool. Okay, well, let's talk about nitrogen a little bit, because kind of the converse of the carbon-rich nutrients or materials, then you've got nitrogen, things that are cut alive, kind of like hay, grass, plants from your garden. But then there's other materials that, like one brought up here several times, is coffee grounds, or fish emulsion, seaweed. I saw somebody mention. Are those all things that are viable for your greens?
Yeah, well, it also would be
or your nitrogen. Where would that go?
Right, your nitrogen. If you think about any material that's normally considered like a good fertilizer for your garden, that's rich enough to be kind of that, can be utilized as a nitrogen source, because that's normally why we're applying it to the garden. And so that's where, in some parts of the world, if you're super strapped for resources, some people can use even, if they're in an industrial, like in a very, like some parts of Africa, the soil is really destroyed. They've used tons of chemical fertilizers, so they're having a hard time finding their nitrogen source. Well, even if they just had chemical ammonium nitrate, they could use that as their nitrogen source by having like a small bag of it can make a huge compost pile rather than how far that little bag would go applied to the field. Or the same thing with, people have asked about, what about urine or other, any of those kind of nutrient rich things tend to contribute to feeding those microbes in a way that help them to break down that material. And I would just say, like, nitrogen is one of those materials that you have to kind of make sure that you get the right amount, more so than the other materials, because our goal is to give the bacteria enough nitrogen to kind of really be active for the first 4 weeks or so. But then we really want them to run out of nitrogen, so that then it cools off towards the end. Otherwise, if we give them too much nitrogen, I've done that in the past, is it never gets cool, and they just keep working. Instead of having that nice, partially decomposed compost that you can put on your garden, it's actually decomposed almost to nothing. And you have nice, fine stuff when you're done, but it doesn't go as far as if you had kind of allowed them to run out partway through that decomposition process, so that they can finish once you put it on the garden. And the same thing, if your pile is not getting hot, it's almost always because we didn't put enough nitrogen in the pile, as long as your moisture level is correct, which when you dunk, that's almost never the problem. If you dunk your material, the moisture is almost always right, but your nitrogen, you may need to do it. And if that's the case, that's one thing you can, let's say you don't have enough nitrogen, your pile didn't get hot, and you realize, well, maybe that wasn't enough because you were trying to be, careful. You can just turn your pile and then add a little bit more nitrogen throughout the pile, whether it's your manure or it's your legumes or whatever it may be. But then once you do that, you got to kind of start over your calendar from day one, like you were building it from scratch, because you've just added new material.
Yep. And this, you guys, is where the nuances come in. The system is very simple, but sometimes applying it to your situation, what resources you have, right? That's where the dialogue goes. And obviously, we can't solve all of those things. And that's where the class and the community bring it all together, where you've got a place to really get into this and dive in deep and look at what are the resources you have and how to apply them and solve some of these nuances to make things work past just, the basic 1, 2, 3 system. So want to encourage you to get in there and check that out. We've got to do one more giveaway. I want to answer a question about pricing, and we're going to do one more question or so, and then I know we're running down on time and got to go. But Andrew claimed his prize. His prize is annual membership. So congratulations, Andrew, and welcome to the School of Traditional Skills. Can't wait to see you in the community. And we're going to do one more giveaway here for Vicki McRae. Vicki McRae, you've won annual membership to School of Traditional Skills. So we're just here for a few minutes. Come claim that. Come grab it. Hopefully you're here. And while we're getting ready to wrap up, there is a question about the special pricing. Does it end? Well, it does end at special pricing. So we do have to shut that down. It's only open for a short time, for a few days. Encourage you to jump in there right now, but we will send you an email. We're going to send out a replay. We didn't really talk about that today. We always send you guys out a replay. It will be available for a few days along with the special pricing, and we'll let you know all about that in email. So just keep your eyes open for that replay and information about the special pricing. Okay, well, we're waiting for Vicki McRae to claim her prize. Let's talk about, let's see here, the top mulching. So this is going a little past composting, but there's an interesting discussion about even compost as mulch here. But you have a mulch, and people are asking about what that is and how you're mulching.
Yeah, so we, when we're teaching gardening in the stuff that we do, part of what I learned when I went to Zimbabwe was the method of Foundations for Farming that was developed by my mentor, Brian Oldreeve. And he, was facing challenges on his farm, and then just went into the woods and said, okay, God, teach me how you farm, because this stuff is growing great. My fields aren't so much. And the two principles he took away was, minimal soil disturbance and natural creation. And there was always a blanket of mulch on the ground. So he took those two principles and applied them. And it gave them so much success that they were at one time the second largest privately owned farm in Africa. And then he felt led to take those same principles and teach them to the poor. And so that's where, as we're teaching it, those are two principles we keep in place. And we find that compost has the most impact in our gardens. Even in Alabama red clay that seems hard packed, I've planted right, you put that nice living layer on the top, which is mimicking what we see in the forest. You got your red clay, great, but that's fine. Red clay is healthy soil as long as it's got that living skin on the top of compost, and then mulch on top of the compost to protect that mulch and provide the right environment for those microbes to function. And then when we plant through that into the dirt, it's almost counterintuitive how well the plants do when you're like, I didn't do anything except just remove the weeds and do that. But we use a grass-based mulch for a lot of our vegetables in our gardens, primarily because with our extreme weather and stuff in Alabama, leaves tend to move around too much. Wood chips tend to wash away, and the grass locks in place in a way that keeps it stable and allows it to stay in the spot that I put it.
Right on. Okay. One more question while we're giving Vicki a chance here. I haven't heard yet if she's claimed. So Vicki McRae, come on in and get your free annual membership. Last question while we're waiting is from Elizabeth. Does the heating eliminate potential issues from manure, such as pharmaceuticals, if from horses or animals? We have access to manure from a zoo and something got my way there, and an equestrian center, but I'm nervous to try it based on the unknowns of the animals. And I think that's a great question, because people are trying to be resourceful and use the materials they have at hand. And so does the thermal composting process help neutralize any of that if that's a risk?
Yeah, I would just say the biggest challenge you're going to face is in those herbicides, and those are going to be in the animal feed that the people are feeding them. And so in terms of pharmaceuticals and those kind of things, some of those may not have as long a persistence as some of the, dewormers or stuff. But you imagine if an animal is eaten like a dewormer, and then that's in the manure in your compost where you're trying to grow living things, it could be counterproductive. So that's it is a challenge to. I personally wouldn't recommend getting manure from a source that you're not really sure of, unless you're willing and desperate enough to say, I'm going to try it, but I'm not going to put it on my whole garden all at once. If you try it and you make a pile because you've got it available for you, you've got zoo poo. I had a friend that made compost from zoo poo one time, and other stuff. Just have a little spot and try it. Especially if you have plants that are not grasses, like corn will do well with grazing because it's a grass. But especially some of those persistent herbicides, it's when you go to grow beans and stuff that you'll, if you see them not grow well in it, when it's like you're in compost, you should be happy. Then you probably want to avoid putting it on the rest. But if you do a test plot, grow a diversity of crops, everything loves it and it's great, then it might be safe to start applying it around the rest of the homestead.
Yeah, I love that. And that's, experiment, try things off to the side and, see what works. And that can be really a great way to figure things out. And, well, hey, I'm going to answer one myself real quick from Charles Salmon. Can you use weeds as greens? Absolutely. I love using the resources that you have. I've actually let the weeds grow tall to shade the ground at times and then harvest them before they go to seed. And so they're mulching, they're providing shade in the heat, and then going into the compost pile. So lots of neat things you can do. And you guys, there's still over 800 of you here. You've been here for over 2 hours. I really want to encourage you to join the school, join the community. That's where this conversation continues. That's where it just gets richer, is being in there, taking the depth of Noah's class, the other classes, joining the community and being a part of that. It offers you something that's very, very hard to find anywhere. Where you're gonna grow together with other folks that are alongside you, maybe a little behind you. You're gonna help them, other people that are ahead of you, plus our instructors. And so you're obviously committed. You're here. You've been here. You've taken 2 hours of your day to come and listen and watch. So come hang out with us. Come join the community. Come back and see Noah. He'll be back in, I think, 2 weeks, right, Noah?
Yep.
And the challenge will have gotten started. The whole bunch of you will be making your compost, and we'll dive into this and have another great conversation. So everybody, let's thank Noah for being here, for giving his time today. We appreciate you, Noah. We're just so thankful for your experiences and your heart to serve and to share knowledge and to help us all along this journey. We really, really appreciate you. And well, for those of us that are in the community, we'll look forward to seeing you again in a couple weeks. And until then, everybody, we'll see you next time. Take care and God bless.
All right. See y'all later.